The book is called The Rise and Reign of Mike Krzyzewski. It is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Your level of reporting is insane. As I read it, I'm like, okay, how the hell do you know this stuff? You're going back to Army games. But here's what's fascinating. We forget, we are so impatient with young people these days. Mike Krzyzewski had a losing record at Army. 5 years into Duke, they were getting sandblasted by ACC teams, and they gave him a contract extension. And I think that gets lost in this, is that you go back to John Wooden, as you know, Ian. He didn't win big for a long time. But let's go back and discuss this. This book is so fun. It really is. When you bring in the Bob Knight stuff, it is jet fuel to this book. It is just, you can't get enough of this. But let's go back. How the heck did he get that Duke job? I know because I read it. He had a losing record at Army, and in fact, Bob Knight was a much better coach at Army than Krzyzewski. It would be easy to go, well, Knight's the great coach. You're a shadow of Knight. Why did he get it?
Well, Knight helped him get it, and thanks for the kind words, Colin. But Knight was a fairly big advocate of Mike getting that job at Duke. Now, he was 9-17 that final season. Tom Butters, the AD at Duke, deserves so much credit for having the you-know-what to hire him at 9-17 coming out of Army. Steve Visendak was an official in the athletic department, former player, and he was an advocate too. He had seen Mike coach at Army and was a pretty big believer in him and sort of, hey, you don't know how to pronounce his name. You certainly don't know how to spell it, but the guy's a really good defensive coach. You, Tom, believe in defense. Let's give this guy a chance. And Butters loved him in the interview process, and he just had a hard time pulling the trigger. How am I going to sell this to an ACC fan base? Bill Foster just took us to the national championship game. I'm going to hire a 9-17 coach at Army nobody's ever heard of, but he did. Those early years were brutal, and the boosters were calling for his head. Fans, students, faculty members wanted him out. He lost, you said ACC opponents. He lost to Wagner at home. Wagner, if you go back and look at that Wagner team in the ECAC Metro, I believe they were in, they were terrible in that conference. They were losing to LIU, St. Francis of New York, and they beat Duke at Duke. And that was the point where it really looked like Mike could not survive. Somehow he hung in there. Butters, out of nowhere, gives him a contract extension, and the rest is history. He got that recruiting class, Billis, Allery, Dawkins, Henderson, and really that saved him. Without that recruiting class, he gets fired.
Yeah, Johnny Dawkins, there's a moment with Johnny Dawkins where I think they beat Carolina and they have this embrace. There's a funny line. Tell the audience here. So it's the moment. It's Mike's. It really crystallizes, to me, the book. The center point of the book is that moment where, Dean Smith is godlike. Mike, at one point, challenges the media to have an equal standard. You treat them like this and us like the little engine, which, by the way, they mostly were. But that Johnny Dawkins, that win, that moment, that embrace in that story.
Right, and finally beating Carolina in a big moment on a big stage. And before that game, he had told his players, at that point, Duke had gotten pretty good. So they were not a huge underdog in that game, but expected to lose. And he told his players, expect to win. And when we win, don't act like you haven't been there before. Act like you expected to do exactly what you just did, which is beat North Carolina, your biggest rival. So they win the game. And Krzyzewski's dancing around. He's happier than anybody, and he hugs Dawkins. And Dawkins says to him, Coach, I thought we weren't really supposed to celebrate this. That's what you said. And Coach K, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit because I don't have the page in front of me. Shut up, Johnny. Let's just enjoy this, okay? So I thought that really was a beautiful scene. But yeah, Krzyzewski he did not follow his own advice. His players tried to, but then they saw how happy Mike was, and they played along.
The criticisms of Krzyzewski, he had a little Bobby Knight. He had a temper. He could throw a chair. He was smarter than Bob in that he knew when the cameras were on. I mean, we saw him bark on the sideline for years. What is the criticism of Krzyzewski that you would buy into, that you think is fair? Because he's obviously, John Wooden, they're in this rarefied, Bobby Knight are in this rarefied air. We all know the criticism of Wooden, which is, did he buy some of his players? We know the criticism of Knight is he was really at times a bully and a bad person. Mm-hmm. What's the criticism that lands to you on Krzyzewski?
When you mentioned he threw a chair, he actually did in practice at Army. He threw a chair across the floor, and the player who told me that story said he threw the chair. He wasn't throwing it at me. He was throwing that chair instead of me. But he was so angry, he did actually do something before Bobby Knight threw a chair on TV in the middle of the game. That's the difference. Mike did it behind closed doors, and Bob Knight did it on television in the middle of the game. So that sort of is where those two, I always thought Mike would go up to the line that Knight would cross, but Mike would never cross that line and certainly get physical with a player. But the degrading language was so intense.
Yes.
At times, I do think it was too much. And most of that was in practice. The first time I sat behind him at a game, it was in '99, Sweet 16 against Steve Alford's Southwest Missouri State team. And I could not believe for 2.5 hours how relentless the profanity was. And not just how relentless it was the profanity was not just your regular profanity. It was really tough to listen to. And I was surprised. I couldn't believe it. I said, there are a lot of grandmothers around America who would be mortified, who love this guy if they ever sat behind him. But I think the criticism to me that is very fair is he has a hard time ever saying, I'm wrong. It's I'm wrong, but guess what? You were wrong too. The mistakes he made with the Jeff Capel chant, with attacking or ambushing the student sports staff of the student newspaper back in 1990. And then he can't ever really apologize fully. The Dylan Brooks thing, it's always, I was wrong, but guess what? You were wrong too. So he's very sensitive to criticism. He has a very hard time saying, I'm sorry. I would say, though, overall, his flaws are fairly benign for the most part, but they're there, and I do document them in the book.
I really do hold him in a very elite class. I've always, I think, sometimes I've been forced to separate art from artist. So Bobby Knight's, to me, despicable in so many ways, but I do think creating the motion offense, maybe the best basketball team in the 70s, that undefeated Indiana team, which, by the way, in your book, it's detailed. The Indiana players thought the team the year before was better than that team, although they had a heartbreaking loss. I do think, I didn't see Moiba, but the Kentucky coach, Iba. Joe B. Hall, my bad. Yeah. I apologize. But I think wouldn't Bobby Knight, Coach K, am I missing somebody?
Dean Smith, if you're talking
you're
about
right.
I mean, if you want to put Rupp there, although I have a hard time putting Rupp anywhere based on the way he conducted his program and obviously discriminating against African-American players. So I don't put him on the mount. But I think Krzyzewski and Wooden are 1 and 1A. I would put Mike ahead of John Wooden, actually. He's won 530 more games than John Wooden. I believe durability matters. They both went to 12 Final Fours. I understand the Wooden crowd says it's a ridiculous comparison. It's 10-5 in national titles. How can you put the two in the same category? But no, I think when you've won 530 more games in a tougher era to do it with parity and one and done, all the things that Coach K had to adapt to that Wooden didn't really have to worry about, I would go Mike Krzyzewski 1, John Wooden 1A.
College sports now are going through an interesting time. Transfer portal, name, image, likeness. Coach K is still very good. Do you think, and he's pretty spry for his age, do you think any of the changing of the sport, a couple of years ago, he was really critical publicly that he was so disappointed in the lack of leadership in the sport. Roy Williams, by the way, could have continued to coach, although for some reason to me it feels like Coach K has more prime years than Roy did at the end. Do you think there are mitigating factors why Coach K retired, or is it just I did it, I'm done, it's a good number, I'm out?
No, I think, Colin, there are mitigating factors. And he said the pandemic had nothing to do with it. He said the new era of college basketball, where there's free agency through the transfer portal, NIL being a part of that, an extension of that. I think that definitely was a factor, because he talked to some of his friends about those very things. And those friends told me about that he was saying those things. And so I think there are a number of different factors. Certainly age 75, it's time. He does want to spend more time with his grandchildren, his family, his wife, Mickey. Those things are all true. But the pandemic really wore him down. That was a bad team last year. He did a bad coaching job with a bad team. And so he knew this team was going to be better than that. And I think he did want to end obviously on a good note, but he told some of his friends, hey, I don't know who's coming and going. I don't know who's in quarantine today, who's coming to practice. Are we going to have our game played tonight or will it be canceled? So that did wear him down without question. I think also, I don't know who's coming and going in the transfer portal. And I think that threw him for a bit of a tizzy without question. So those factors were part of it. He said they were not. And I just frankly don't believe that part of his explanation anyway.
The book is called The Rise and Reign, Coach K, The Rise and Reign of Mike Krzyzewski. It's so instructive. There's so many historic elements to it, fascinating stories. I just think you'll love it, folks. I think you'll really, really love it. And I say this with a bit of disappointment is my first job out of college, I covered TARC. So the first sport that I really covered, the first two sports I covered that were big time, that made me feel like I belonged, were boxing in Vegas, Tyson fight, Sugar Ray Leonard Hearns, and college basketball. I was at when David Robinson was at Navy, Pat O'Brien was on the sidelines. It was really appointment viewing. We get that so infrequently now in college basketball, so I just couldn't recommend this more highly to any of you. Hi, everybody. It's Colin Cowherd, your affable host. I don't ask for much, really. That little box over there, subscribe box, push that. Subscribe to the YouTube page of The Volume Sports. Now, there will be a brief electrical shock after you do it, but hey, we're all in this together, right?